All right, recording, we're gonna get started. Welcome everybody. This is Panama Bartholomew with the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and welcome to our webinar series, Building Decarbonization Coalition Presents. And today's webinar on accessible electrification financing for all. We're really excited about today's session. We have some of the top thinkers, doers, and speakers in the field to present today's topic. And so we're really pleased that you're joining us today. We had over 280 registrants for today's webinar, which I think shows the recognition of the importance of bringing accessible financing options if we're going to be able to really meet any of our goals for building decarbonization. So just as a little bit of intro to give people time to come in, as well as to talk to you about who we are and what we're working on here. So the Building Decarbonization Coalition is a cross-sectoral coalition of energy providers, manufacturers of heating equipment, the design and construction community, local governments, non-governmental organizations, and others. And we work together on both policy and market solutions for how to drive decarbonization. In 2019, we released a roadmap for how to decarbonize California's buildings that called for a series of numerical goals to be met if we're to have buildings play their role in decarbonizing decarbonizing the entirety of California's economy. And so you see those up on the screen, but basically that by the end of this decade, we have codes in California that require zero emission buildings for new construction, that we've implemented a series of programs to bring existing buildings down to zero emissions by 2045. And then some of the critical technologies, heat pump water heaters and air source heat pumps, meet 100% of market share of sales by 2030 and beyond. And in order to achieve these numerical goals, we also laid out some overall goals that would need to be accomplished if we're to be able to meet those numbers. And these were really speaking to what are some of the barriers that we need to overcome. And those are up there on the screen, but in short, we need to significantly raise awareness among all stakeholders. We have to ensure there's a good quality value proposition for customers as well as the builders and installers of heating equipment. We have to make sure the supply chain is ramped up and is able to provide the units at scale, as well as getting rid of the barriers holding back the supply chain. And then we need to make sure that all of our policies are aligned so that we don't have policies of climate and clean air and equity out of alignment with affordable housing, school construction, and other policies. And so that all of our policies are aligned so the top four goals can really be met. And this webinar series rests directly within that first goal, raising awareness. And the webinar series is one of the ways that the coalition seeks to help to bring greater awareness to the benefits of electrification by really bringing in who we view as some of the top, again, thinkers, doers, and speakers on topics within electrification to be able to bring them to the community to offer insights. So we're really happy that you join us on this one today. And then in 2 weeks, we have another fantastic one. A brand new report came out last month about looking at 40 years of research on the health effects from gas stoves. And the physicians from Social Responsibility and Rocky Mountain Institute are going to co-lead a webinar for us on July 23rd. So please go to the website and register for that webinar coming up. So just some logistics before I hand it over to the team. Everyone is muted coming in. Again, there's about 280 registrants, so we just can't have everybody unmuted. Please ask your questions via chat, and then we'll ask the speakers those questions when we're done. This webinar is being recorded, and members of the coalition can access the recording on the website. It's one of the benefits of membership. And becoming a member of the coalition gets you so many other great benefits. And so we would love to have you join the coalition if you're not yet a member. And for those of you that are, thank you very much. Your support makes webinars like this possible. And so to join us, just buildingdecarb.org/join to join us over. So Bruce, if you could, I'll hand this over to you now to start sharing. I'll just provide a little intro while you're doing that. So the Building Decarbonization Coalition, as we were going over the roadmap, there was a clear recognition that public programs are never going to be able to provide enough funding to be able to meet the scale and the speed of the transition we know we need in order to avoid catastrophic climate change, in order to decarbonize buildings and all the benefits that come with it. And that we're going to need to be able to bring financing to bear. And we also know that so many members of our community are left out of the opportunity to access financing. And so we need much more accessible financing than we've ever had. And so we looked out over the terrain of the building decarbonization community and really plucked who we thought were some of the top thinkers on this issue, to bring them together to work with us in developing a white paper around accessible financing for building decarbonization. And we're releasing that white paper today. And the presentation today is really speaking to why you need a white paper on something like this, why you need financing of this sort, and then what our recommendations are for California's specific policy and demographic mix for how to bring accessible financing to bear. And so right now, we're going to be hearing from Bruce Mast from Adrena Energy, from Holmes Hummel from Clean Energy Works, and from Gene Clinton from Gene Clinton. And they're all going to be presenting on today's paper. So thank you very much for joining us, and sit back and enjoy hearing about accessible finance from some of the top thinkers in the field. Bruce, I hand it over to you.
Panama, thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure and honor to be here today. And it's also just really exciting that the white paper is released today.
And also,
hello? Everyone can hear me? I think Panama already covered the logistics. It's great. We've got more than 280 people signed up for today's webinar. So I expect there's a mix of people who've been following this project all along, as well as people who maybe are coming to the conversation for the first time. So we're going to go over some content. Some of it will be familiar, some of it will be new. I'm going to spend some time introducing the project and talking about why we thought this project was so important to pursue at this time. I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague Holmes Hummel to give us a little intro to Tariffed On-Bill investment options. And as you'll see in the white paper, this was a central focus of our research. And then Holmes will pass the baton to our colleague Gene Clinton, who will take us home with a discussion of the policy roadmap recommendations that we developed to really chart a path for how we can get started, and then how we can build on early success in order to achieve scale. So we start out with a fairly straightforward and a humble objective, or ambitious objective, depending on your view, which was to set out a policy roadmap and thought leader consensus for deploying a financing mechanism that could put decarbonization investments within reach of most, if not all, Californians, regardless of income, liquidity, or home ownership status. So that's fairly tall order, frankly. Our focus primarily was at the policy level. We almost inevitably got into some of the implementation issues, and certainly a number of coalition members are very interested in implementation issues. We address some implementation issues in the white paper and offer some guideposts for those, although we don't necessarily make definitive statements on some of those statements. So our first and foremost priority was around the policy statements. I said the white paper is out, it's on the street. You can download it from the Building Decarbonization Coalition website. Here's basically the outline of the white paper. I'm not going to go into all this. We're going to talk about some of the key topics here. I'm not going to talk about everything in the white paper today, but certainly going to talk about the why and the how and the outcomes. So let's get right into understanding the rationale and why this project is important and why we should be doing this now. The first thing to understand is that this project, it fits within a trajectory here of policy research and development here in California. So we see this as a step in executing a pre-existing set of policy directives and recommendations. So Jerry Brown's executive order calling for a carbon neutral economy by 2045 and Senator Stern's SB 1477 for low emissions buildings, these policy statements explicitly called for equitable solutions to address our climate action goals. The Building Decarbonization Coalition's roadmap also addressed equity in the context of an overall decarbonization framework, as Panama just described. Then we have the Energy Commission's Low Income Barrier Study. We've got the PUC's Environmental Social Justice Action Plan, Greenlight Institute's white paper just last year on equitable building electrification. These all consider how to address equity in the context of climate action investments. And the Energy Commission and Greenlight Institute in particular called explicitly for Tariffed On-Bill financing solutions. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants here, and we're no longer considering just if, but how to move this forward to the next step. It is worth considering the why question, so we understand why we're doing this, and helps us think about what success looks like. Really kind of three big areas, three big answers to this question, all revolving around themes of equity and inclusion, resource availability, timing, urgency. I'm going to discuss each of these in a little bit more depth. First is the focus on low and moderate income households and renters. And this one hopefully is intuitive. First answer, there's a lot of households that fall into those categories. Almost something like 43% of California households, almost 6 million households would qualify as low or moderate income and or renters. So if you look at our climate action goals and our target of getting to a carbon neutral economy by 2045, there's simply no way to do that unless everyone can come along. That's imperative. That should be a slam dunk. We also know from past experience that we can't just rely on market forces alone. We can't just invest in upper income homeowners and expect those results to trickle down. We're going to need some explicit policy interventions to make sure that we're delivering these solutions and that they're accessible to everyone and everyone can benefit. We're not just proposing programs that are only for low and moderate income households. We're looking for solutions that are really universal in scope and scale and capable of reaching everybody that was reached the full market. From a market transformation perspective, that kind of success leads to higher project volumes, more deal flow, more interest from the private capital sector, more innovations both in technology as well as delivery methods and channels. And we've seen these kinds of success in the past through our investments in rooftop solar, for example, through the California Solar Initiative. So we know it's possible. And so we need to do the same thing for these broader investments to get us to zero carbon. It's important to put financing in context of what it can and what it can't do. It is, we think, an essential tool in our toolbox, but is not the only tool, and it's not the silver bullet. So here on this slide, just putting this in context, that first bar here on the left, you see is just a back of the envelope estimate of what we would need to be investing on an annual basis just to get to kind of basic electrification for 6 million low and moderate income households and renters. And you do the math, published estimates have concluded it would take between $12,000 and $25,000 per home. What just happened here? Am I still? Back to here, sorry. My apologies for that. So we estimate it'll take $12,000 to $25,000 per home. And there's 6 million households, and we need to get this done in 10 to 15 years. And you can multiply it out, and you come up with a number on the order of $5 billion.
And Bruce, we're not seeing your screen.
I'm not showing my screen here. Let me get back here and fix that. How about now?
There we go. It's up.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. So we estimate this, we're going to need about $5 billion a year to get this done over a period of 10 to 15 years. And you compare that with what we've been investing as a state, in public funds. And you can look at money that we've been investing just for energy affordability for low-income households through our CARE and LIHEAP programs. You look at what we've been investing for weatherization and solar for low-income households, and you can add in all the dollars we've earmarked for residential energy efficiency and the money that's been planned for future home heat pump water heater programs. You can add it all up and you get to a number that's somewhere less than $2 billion. So whatever number of public investment you think we'll be able to put forward going forward, to me it's pretty clear that we still need some kind of financing mechanism to attract more private capital to this space to accelerate that velocity of investment. So we see financing as an essential tool in our toolbox to make this all work. On the other hand, financing is not the silver bullet, and it's not going to do it all by itself. There's a lot going on in this slide, so let me walk you through it here a little bit. This is some, again, back of the envelope analysis for a hypothetical scenario, actually 3 investment scenarios for a typical home in Rancho Cucamonga. Typical, although this is actually a high energy user, it's not an average energy user. And what you see here is we got 3 scenarios starting with basic electrification of the space conditioning and domestic hot water end uses. The next scenario adds energy efficiency to that. And the third scenario layers on a rooftop solar installation on the other 2. And so you can see that we've got installation costs that are going up with deeper, more comprehensive scopes of work. And then you can see a set of kind of operational outcomes and benefits. And down here in this third row from the bottom, you can see annual bill savings, and those get better as we go forward. And in this scenarios, we basically partition that bill savings, 80% to cover for cost recovery for the investments that we're making up front, and 20% to accrue back to the occupant. And then on the graphs here on the right, we're showing how all that kind of combines into a capital stack. And you can see this financing portion is the blue. It's pegged to the bill savings, and it can cover part of the cost. It can't cover all of the costs, so we still need some incentives in there. And I've put out some hypothetical numbers. These are not real numbers, but some hypothetical numbers about what some added incentives might be. And you see we still got this orange bar here. That's the customer copay. So we're not bringing that down to 0. At a minimum, we'd like to at least reduce that below kind of the like-for-like replacement cost, so that the customer, by going this path, is spending less than they would if they just took the old broken equipment and replaced it with the same equipment. So that would be an improvement. Several important things that I think flow from this example. One is that the finance charges are important. So here I've got 3% per year cost of capital, and if we could make that 0, these orange stacks would go down. Of course, if it's more than 3, then the orange stack goes up. So that's an important thing to note. I want to stress that this analysis is for a high energy user. It's not an average user. We know these customers are out there. We don't know how many. We don't exactly know where they are, although we could figure it out if we looked at the historic energy consumption. So we need to be really thoughtful about how we're targeting customers and how we're marketing. And we need to be working to grow that market potential over time. And we need to think beyond just kind of planning for the average customer. We need to be a little bit more sophisticated than that. Energy costs, of course, are a big driver here. So right now I've got this 22 cents a kilowatt hour, which depending on the time of day that you're running your equipment, it could be a lot higher than that. On the other hand, if we can power our homes with electricity when it's cheap and clean and plentiful, then maybe we can get this number down. I think this, including the solar scenario here, is illustrative. To me, it tells a couple stories. One is the value of thinking holistically about decarbonization from the customer's perspective, and all the different ways that we can reduce that carbon footprint and not getting stuck in our little silos, and this can only be for electrification and that's only energy efficiency. We need to really think about how everything works together. I think this also illustrates the power of market transformation. One of the things that makes this stack work is that through our market transformation strategies for rooftop solar, we've been able to bring down that installed cost from, back in the day, it used to be $10 or $15 per watt. Now it's in the order of $3 and $4 a watt. That makes the economics work a lot better. One thing you'll note is that there's no added incentive here in this analysis for the solar piece. There is an embedded benefit to the customer through the net energy metering rate. And that to me illustrates the power of a financing solution, because it means that we can now have performance-based incentives that are on the bill rather than just a slug of money up front. And the financing mechanism can basically translate from operational savings to capital investment. And that, I think, is a really powerful solution going forward. So we have a lot more design opportunities here if we have a good financing solution in our toolkit. Talking about the why now question, and hopefully this is also a no-brainer for most of us. I've already touched on the importance of developing solutions that are accessible to everyone. There are certainly some concerns, and I certainly have concerns that, when we talk about electrification, it's, I think, pretty apparent that electrification upgrades are not cost-effective for everyone today. They're cost-effective for some. I think it is arguably true that there are no regrets investments that are accessible to everyone today, and we should start there. And let's develop a solution to start investing in the no regrets opportunities. And as these additional investments become more cost effective, we can expand our investment and go deeper and further and reach more customers and reduce more carbon. So let's start with those no regrets solutions. The other thing that we know is that if we start now setting up our financing solution, it's going to take us a while. We need a runway to really have an operational solution that's capable of getting us to scale. And as the proverb goes, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So we need to get started. So all of that thinking went into and Panama touched on this in his opening remarks, kind of why we set out on this project last fall. One of the first things we did as a research team is to really articulate some design criteria that for us reflect kind of our definition of success. Like, what do we need to be able to show that, that our work is done, that we have a policy solution that is capable of meeting our goals. And so we outlined 4 design criteria. And if you've followed this project over the months, these are probably familiar to you. First one should be straightforward. We need to be able to finance investments over a long period of time, comparable to the useful lives of the equipment that we're installing. So partly just to be able to spread out those costs and make it more affordable. And we need to be able to bridge when there's turnover in the occupant, and one occupant moves out and another occupant moves in, we need to be able to, bridge that and continue a financing solution that extends beyond that. So we're not limited to the tenure of the occupant. We think it's really important to be able to leverage these utility bill savings as a source of value, partly to liberate ourselves from strict reliance on consumer credit and liquidity and asset ownership and all those factors that so typically disqualify people from participation. So the more that we can leverage utility bill savings, the more accessible we can make this. Number 3, I think, is pretty critical, particularly as we're talking about serving and expanding access to low and moderate income households. It's vitally important that we're not adding energy burden, that we're actually reducing energy burden, making energy more affordable. And so these investments need to be cash positives from the occupant's perspective. And the final one should be a no-brainer. We've got a limited amount of time to get this done. And so we need to be serving millions of households, and we need to be able to get to everybody. So with that, I would like to pass the baton to Holmes and invite Holmes to give us an introduction to Tariffed On-Bill investment and start to kind of connect the dots between this and our design criteria.
Thank you, Bruce. My name is Holmes Hummel. I'm the founder of Clean Energy Works and the former senior policy advisor at the Department of Energy during the Recovery Act. And during that era, there was billions of dollars deployed for building energy upgrades. And we sought to extend the impact that that historic policy could have by transitioning from funding to financing solutions, only to find so many customers caught at the gateway by the three questions that you see on the screen. In fact, nationwide, a vast majority of customers choose not to use consumer credit products to capitalize what many of you on today's call know have always been lucrative investment opportunities under their very own roof. During my service at the Department of Energy, we were able to tap into the national labs to explore what field experience could tell us about an alternative now called Tariffed On-Bill investments. This part of today's conversation is applicable to all 50 states. And I saw the chat box inquiry about one state in particular, but I hope that you'll be able to think imaginatively about what the market could bring when utilities are a partner in capitalizing cost-effective upgrades. Let's proceed, Bruce. The first of these visual aids allows us to just capture a familiar picture of the utility that has traditionally capitalized supply-side investments delivering services to homes. But if Bruce taps once more, you'll see that the utilities have been able to devise, using current communications, billing, and metering technology, a way to capitalize investments at a specific site, and also to associate with that site a charge on the bill that's less than the value of those upgrades, so the customer is cash flow positive as the utility proceeds to recover its costs over time with the charge on the bill that's less than those estimated savings. This is the principle that underlies site-specific investment and cost recovery under the terms of a tariff that's approved by the economic regulators in utility commissions and oversight boards coast to coast. Let's proceed, Bruce. The way that transaction path works is a utility draws in low-cost capital from the competitive capital markets, deploys that capital to cost-effective solutions provided in an open competition arena of qualified contractors. Those solutions are installed in sites that are served by the utility, and the utility proceeds to recover its costs with a charge on the bill that is already present in the commercial relationship that the utility has with the customers at that site, both the present customers and any customers that are occupying that site in the future. This transaction path is different than transactions you might have heard about related to consumer lending, where the consumer's credit is actually depended upon in order to complete the cycle. That's not true in site-specific investment and cost recovery for utilities, and it's also not a solution that's limited to building decarbonization. So it was exciting for Clean Energy Works to be invited to join Gene Clinton, Bruce Mast, and the team at the Building Decarbonization Coalition to explore how it could be applied for the very first time in a California context to building decarbonization. Let's move forward. One of the things that's important for our team to do whenever we address an audience as large as the one we have today is to make sure that notions that may be familiar to audiences related to on-bill loans are put into contrast with the best practices that are known for tariffed on-bill terms. There are program designs in the field, specifically the one that has been developed by Energy Efficiency Institute called Pay As You Save, that have been most often adopted and approved by utility commissions. They have really distinctly different characteristics, which also lead to different customer experiences and different types of consumer protections. The first thing to note about this chart is the second and third lines that lead to expansive market access. The addressable market for both the vendors and the residents is so much greater, and that allows the velocity of capital and the economies of scale to be achieved sooner. I'll move very quickly here to the bottom 3 rows of the slide, knowing that you can all read the things of interest in between, to note that one of the features of the utility's investment and cost recovery is that it uses the very same security that it uses for every other service that it delivers. And that is the basic fundamental bargain that customers pay for the services they receive, and if they stop paying, the utility stops delivering the service. This prospect of disconnection for non-payment always and should draw red flags for consumers and consumer advocates that want to make sure that the worst possible outcomes are not actually the price that someone pays for a cost-effective home upgrade. The truth is that now, after $40 million of capital deployed in half a dozen states, thousands of transactions over a period of 10 years, there are 0 reported disconnections for non-payment in any of the building energy efficiency programs that use tariffed on-bill investments approved by utility commissions based on the pay-as-you-save system. That track record gives us some assurance that the utility investment model is adaptable and expandable to address the distributed energy solutions that are critical to meeting the state's climate goals. Let's move forward. Most people will be familiar with energy efficiency programs that calculate the benefits as the estimated average upgrade benefits per year multiplied by however long you think that upgrade will last. And the multiplication between those two will produce a green rectangle like the one you see. The pay-as-you-save system, as a design for tariffed on-bill investments, docks both of those critical estimates, the estimated savings and the estimated useful life, to produce a new box, the blue one that you see on the screen, using something that's called an 80% rule. It caps the cost recovery charge for the customer to 80% of the estimated savings, and it also caps the cost recovery period at estimated 80% of the estimated useful life. Bruce, if you tap once more, you'll see a short formula in the bottom right, which just goes to show that the area of the blue square, I'm sure Bruce will be back with his screen momentarily. The area of the blue rectangle is 2/3 the size of the green one. This is designed to visually convey to our audience the level of conservative protections for consumers that are embedded in the program design. Bruce, you're flawless. Thank you. Just move us forward one more screen. This is a picture of the United States, and it's a weather map that shows the imprint of poverty in our population using the results of the last census. And while that was 10 years ago, the heat on the map hasn't moved or migrated far. It's important, therefore, for me to address an audience that's interested in California to point out that the field experience that inspired some of our explorations for this project are informed by places that have deep and pragmatic experience with addressing landscapes of economic distress. If you tap once more, Bruce, you'll see how in the interim, since the first active programs were introduced, interest has spread, and utility commissions in different parts of the country that are taking equity and economics seriously and thinking about accelerating distributed energy solutions are looking at tariffed on-bill terms. Let's move forward once more. The basic value proposition to the customer is that there is the potential to realize energy savings from upgrades installed in the building where they reside without them paying anything up front. Here, I want to note that Bruce has already emphatically stated that our analysis, informed by prior work by E3 for the state of California, shows that in order to achieve even the first condition of these 4 bullets may require a combination of both funding and financing. But the accessible financing proposition starts with the presumption that there is a cost-effective upgrade to be developed and the customer can be addressed with that interest. The utility is the entity that's able to capitalize the upgrade, and it's not a charity program. The utility will recover its cost with a charge on the bill that's less than the estimated savings. That produces net positive cash flow. The customer is not taking out a loan. They are not taking on more debt. There's no lien on their property. What they experience is net positive cash flow, which means lower bills. If the upgrade that's installed should fail and it's not repaired, or if the customer moves away, they're no longer subject to the program charges, and that's an important consumer protection in the program. The majority of the customers who just hear these 4 facts say yes to the offer and opt into the program, allowing capital to flow into the local economy where they reside. Let's move forward once more. The results of that emphatic market response that's been observed again and again in diverse market environments from Hawaii to New Hampshire to Arkansas shows us that these bar charts have a powerful multiplying effect. If you take a program that categorically disqualifies half of the population to start, which is where most of our financing solutions begin, and actually expand it to include everyone, you've doubled the addressable market. And if the customers are saying yes more than half the time, or even 3/4 of the time, as some of the best performing programs do, you're seeing 5 times higher acceptance rates. So the customer conversion rates are much higher. And when the risks are well managed, the customers are willing to go for those deep savings because they personally are not putting their consumer credit on the line. That means you get 2 times 5 times 2, that's 20 times the capital velocity using the metrics that you see on this screen. It results in the kind of outcomes that you see at the bottom, and in the sake of time, I'm gonna ask Bruce to advance this right away. Bruce made a point earlier that our quest and service of the members of the Coalition for Building Decarbonization, the one that had all of the logos crammed onto Panama's opening screen, they have committed in the roadmap for California decarbonization to an inclusive future. And the Coalition's mandate to us is to find solutions that would have those qualities. In that quest, we knew that we would be looking for solutions that would not require customers to use their personal financial credit or to qualify for government assistance in order to participate in a decarbonized future. We did not design our recommendations only to serve one market segment and specifically to serve only low-income market segments because of the need to serve all customers. And what we realized was that when we can serve all customers, low-income customers can be served better as well. Let's move forward. The last of my 2 slides simply validate the findings that you'll see in the report, that the qualities of tariffed on-bill programs that have been seen and observed in markets that have been applying them to building energy efficiency upgrades have qualities that meet the design criteria of the project, and they include very critical factors like broad eligibility, capital commitments to a specific site for a specific program of work that's cost effective at that site, a long period of time for cost recovery that allows the monthly cost recovery charges to be manageable within the context of the value stream produced by those upgrades, and the combination of funding and financing, the potential to integrate into the complex matrix of the offerings that are available in California today. Bruce, the next slide actually shows the 4 or 5 design criteria that you introduced. The tick marks simply send us around the victory lap that says, we think we found something that's worth pursuing, but the real home run will be the policy roadmap. How do we get there? Jean Clinton is going to finish us off for today with the recommendations that you'll find in the white paper discussed with more detail that describe the policy steps that can be taken in California to introduce tariffed on-bill terms for building decarbonization and other complementary purposes. Jean, take it away.
Thanks, Holmes. So now I'm going to have us shift to what are the steps that we need to take to put tariff on bill in place in California. And our report makes findings that both POUs and the investor-owned utilities now have broad discretion to implement tariffed on-bill programs subject to their governing board and/or CPUC approval. The CPUC, for example, has the authority to authorize the capital terms and cost recovery arrangements. It can establish public purposes to be served. It can opine on the billing mechanisms and tariffs that will be utilized, and can establish performance targets. Publicly owned utilities already have the autonomy to enact comparable tariffs subject to their own governing boards. And in fact, 2 local government water utilities in California, the town of Windsor and the city of Hayward, have already utilized these types of mechanisms similar to what we're talking about today. And as a side note, I would add that at this time, community choice aggregators, or CCAs, are not authorized to initiate their own tariffed on-bill programs because of the way the investor-owned distribution utility handles the billing mechanisms. But I'm sure this is a subject for future consideration. So let's get started by looking at the 3-step process that's needed to get this mechanism launched. These will be establishing the policy framework, doing more detailed due diligence on the program design for approval, and then launching the programs. Next slide, Bruce. So for the policy framework subject to the PUC or the POU governing boards, there are basically 5 findings and authorities that these governing boards need to make. First of all, they need to authorize a site-specific on-bill cost recovery tariff for decarbonization. Secondly, we need to establish clearly that these charges will be treated as regular elements of the tariff and bill payment system, subject to all the customary procedures for collections. Third, there will need to be some attention to eliminating risk mechanisms for ratepayers, assuming that the utilities are the ones providing the capital investment. The general ratepayer will want to see some risk protection, particularly perhaps in the early stages of how a program is launched in California. As part of securing capital to support the investment of these kinds of decarbonization measures, there will need to be some legal clarification on how the asset is owned or assigned to the utility investor at the beginning, and then how that will evolve over time into ownership of the end use equipment or solution by the building owners. So that transition requires a little bit of legal attention. And finally, we would expect that the governing board and the PUC would provide some guidelines on their expectations for source capital, cost of capital, and also authorize IOUs to source capital on their own that would be comparable with the returns that they would anticipate from any other utility capital source. So these are the key policy decisions that would then lead us to the next slide, which is the deeper due diligence for program design and approval. Our paper goes into quite a bit of detail on what some of the design issues are in terms of economics and cost sharing, the financial and legal considerations, and then in terms of figuring out the details of program offerings that would be offered to consumers and how these would be explained. Our takeaway from doing this work, and more importantly from the stakeholder engagement that we've had over the past 7 or 8 months, is that there have been many questions that immediately have jumped into implementation detail or program design detail. And it is clear that there is a deeper layer of work that's needed in order to arrive at specifics of tariffs and specifics of program design. We believe that these are best explored and advised upon by a multidisciplinary team with robust skills, given the mission to identify workable solutions to get Tariff On-Bill in place. And I just want to underscore a couple of things here. One, at this stage of greater and deeper due diligence, we as a society in California will need the knowledge and contributions that will go far beyond the customary stakeholders who participate in regulatory proceedings. This process is going to need to engage prospective capital providers, retrofit service providers, consumers, environmental and social justice communities, property owners, and their related real estate industry stakeholders. These viewpoints are essential to work out the designs. And as a result, we recommend that regulators would direct that this due diligence occur with sufficient funding, expertise, and pace to work through the details in a timely manner. Then we get, fortunately, to authorizing program design and implementation. Again, our report addresses some of that, encouraged by many of our stakeholders to cover some of these issues, even though they do step a little bit beyond the policy pathway focus that we started out with. But examples of what would go into the design and implementation period would be specifying product and service offerings, figuring out the communication plans, the customer acquisition strategies, the utility IT and billing system solutions and any real estate disclosure practices that might be required. Recognizing that this is quite a mouthful that I've just shared on this one slide, we also suggest that some decarbonization investment packages or market segments may be able to proceed ahead of others as both the economics of the underlying investment packages evolve and as the transaction structures are worked out. And by way of example, I would say that back in 2006, when California adopted the California Solar Initiative, it was a somewhat simplified approach in the market at that point of selling systems. And as we've all witnessed over the last decade, there has been quite a bit of innovation in terms of the pricing, the transaction documents, how risk is absorbed, measuring performance. And I would expect that a tariff on bill arrangement, as it picks up speed, will also go through similar innovation. Next slide. Once we get these programs in place, whether they start out as pilots in multiple locations or more broadly, regionally, I think that the next step with the proof of the pudding, so to speak, and as Holmes showed from the experience in other states, once we have the data, the track record, we figure out the transaction structures, the consumer oversight, then we're ready to go big and scale. And to do that in a really big way, as Bruce presented earlier in his slides, we need to be able to align and integrate funds from multiple value streams. And that really has two dimensions. It means bringing in the kind of spending that might come from utility ratepayer funded initiatives, whether they're about solar efficiency, decarbonization, storage, EV charging. But we also need to identify what are the other value streams outside of the ratepayer base. What are the benefits from health systems? If we're bringing improved indoor air quality, is there a health benefit to be captured? Is there an environmental benefit outside of carbon? In the long run, if we're building in resiliency, whether it's to sea level rise or to forest fires, there may be other value streams that we can capture, perhaps from insurance values and that sort of thing. And then finally, of course, whenever you want to do something in the billions and billions of dollars, it's good to have somewhat of a unified statewide approach to the administration and implementation. And that could be done if we can achieve two things. One is we need to better align structurally the details and terms of these underlying programs that are contributing resources to this overall effort. And secondly, with scale, we can look for lower costs of capital and other risk management techniques that will reduce the total size of those value stacks and cost stacks that Bruce was showing earlier, and certainly be able to reduce the size of the orange bar, which was the customer co-payment needed. So that's in a synopsis, our pathway to getting forward. We will do some other briefings with regulatory commission, decision makers and personnel, and we do have a few more details to cover with them, but we will spare you all today. So I turn it back to Panama and the team.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, all three of you, for your efforts over the last year and then really clear presentation. So I appreciate it. I'm gonna get right into the questions. I think the first one we'll start with, there's been a really robust chat going on. And I think a lot of folks are very familiar with PACE and the movement of PACE over the years. And Holmes, of course, your look at PACE from DOE and the Recovery Act time. Could you give a brief comparison between Tariffed On-Bill approaches and PACE? Holmes, I think probably that's a good one for you.
I'd be happy to. The chat box has been lively on this topic, and I want to acknowledge that I served at the Department of Energy when the federal government's own mortgage lending agencies were contesting the introduction of property assessed clean energy as a policy, and the Department of Energy sought to move it forward. With 10 years of retrospect on that policy decision, we can see that the property assessed clean energy programs were an advantage to landowning residents. So for those people who had property, and most of whom then also had access to capital, they could be well served by those programs. But the programs themselves did not have any of the consumer protections, like the 80% rule that I introduced earlier, that would assure that the customers would experience a net positive cash flow. In other words, it's still street legal to do a money losing PACE program, or a program where a customer takes on board more cost than is generated in value by the upgrades they introduced. And as a result, the consumer protection advocates expressed a great deal of concern. And as some of you who are following the field may know, Los Angeles County closed its billion-dollar market recently. So it's important for us to acknowledge that that was an important innovation and an experiment in using housing industry's financial instruments linked to local property assessments, but it never actually had the kind of level of inclusion that the Tariffed On-Bill approach does and has. And it hasn't produced the level of consumer conversion opt-in rates or the level of appetite for deep savings that we've seen out of the places that have experience with the Tariffed On-Bill terms. I hope that that's a quick tour of the 3 top metrics that allow us to compare them, toe to toe. Be happy to go into more detail. My contact information is at the end of this presentation.
Great, thank you. A question that you did answer in chat, but I think it'd be great to get some verbal here is, what is the capital return on investment percentage utilities get for their capital? And I think this really has to speak to the experience of the programs that have already rolled out, and then best practices coming from that. So I think, Holmes, that's probably a good one for you as well.
Yes, and I attempted a quick written one. I'm so pleased by the level of engagement. I hope everyone will use this chat box very actively, and anything we don't get to in airtime, we can follow up with. The nature of my reply was that it's important for all champions of decarbonization to acknowledge that if utility commissioners treat the cost of capital for a utility differently for decarbonization investments, the utility management teams will also treat the opportunity differently. So it's important to give them a level playing field and allow the utilities return to be similar to anything else they could invest in. Otherwise, they will always find it to be a less attractive investment.
Fantastic, thank you. Just scrolling through these. So a number of folks said, this is amazing. This is exactly what we need. When are we going to see this? And so I think it'd be great for the perspective. All 3 of you, bear the scars of implementing programs across the country, and see how long they took in other states as well, Holmes. But an impression about going from white paper to seeing some of the first pilot programs. What can we expect there? And perhaps, Jean, could you start by giving an update on upcoming proceedings that we're expecting to see?
Well, sure. First, let me put one thing in historical context. Back in 2005, 2006, when the California legislature adopted the California Solar Initiative, it laid out some very ambitious goals. And quite frankly, I think the PUC took up that challenge and proceeded to get a program approved in less than a year. Highly unusual, perhaps, for the schedule of many proceedings there, but certainly can be done. And I don't want to focus just on the PUC. Publicly owned utilities, of which there are some 40 in California, can take up initiatives of their own and have shown in the past that they can work quite speedily. So I think it is more a question of how much of a priority is this, and what are the resources that can be brought to bear to answer some of the due diligence questions. Turning to the PUC specifically, I think it's a bit speculative on our part exactly how proceeding-wise the commission might choose to take up this issue. I think one of the recommendations that we've made in the context of this paper is it's important that whatever the form is, it has the ability to work across the traditional silos of efficiency and decarbonization in solar. So it's important that such a proceeding, whether it's some sort of integrated resource proceeding or whether it's a standalone financing of clean investments in decarb, that it has to have that ability to work across silos. So I'm not going to guess exactly what the PUC's preference would be in terms of where they might assign this kind of an issue.
If I can maybe elaborate on the question a little bit as well, just in terms of opportunities and challenges, you know, I think I would like to see at least one or more programs, you know, get an early start and get some proof of concept and some experience on the ground that is, you know, transferable more broadly. Different utilities, I think, are facing different challenges when they look at this. So, you know, if you're an investor on utility, you know, the price of electricity in our investor-owned utilities in California is kind of high, and as I show those numbers, you know, that's makes it somewhat challenging to construct a value proposition to customers. There are value propositions that exist, but it requires a more sophisticated analysis. We can't just, you know, take average price times average consumption and average savings and come up with, you know, a simple answer. So constructing those win-win value propositions, I think, represents a task on that front. With the publicly owned utilities, I think that there's possibly some appetite and certainly some strong interest there. They have some practical challenges, you know, unlike the IOUs, they haven't necessarily, you know, invested in their billing systems to have like line item billing for on-bill financing and things like that. So some of the infrastructure investments haven't already been made yet, and so those, I think, you know, offer, you know, practical challenges for a POU that wants to stand up a program like this. So, you know, I think at this point we're, you know, we need to talk to anybody who is willing to pursue it and help them succeed.
Wonderful. Bruce, could you advance the slides to the contact information for everybody, please? So here's contact information for at least Bruce and Holmes. Gene doesn't want your emails. But you know, we are running towards the end of the presentation, so I want to have one last question, and we'll seek to address the remaining questions in chat via email. So apologize we can't get to everybody. You all jumped in at the last 10 minutes, and we appreciate that. But we do want to end it on time. So Amber Mahone asked, Bruce mentioned an assumption around 3% financing in his intro example, but the utility cost of capital is usually 7 to 8%. How should we think about the difference? And also, this may be a basic gap, but if utilities are capitalizing the expenses associated with electrification investments, why are the customers also paying fixed charges for the investment?
Actually, Panama, that last question is a priority for me because it seems to have some embedded misunderstanding. I just want to make sure it doesn't. The utility in a tariffed on-bill context is making a site-specific investment, which means that no other customers are participating in the cost recovery for the capital deployed for that site. It's not true that the utility is double dipping or earning capital twice. It's that it needs to decide between whether it's going to capitalize the substation down the street or the decarbonization upgrades that may obviate the need for that substation. And the importance of keeping the utility leadership seeing decarbonization investments on a level playing field does create challenges. Amber's point about the cost of capital is well taken in the context of Bruce's example. I have been a part of projects in multiple states where scenarios that vary the cost of capital allow us to see the differences as you see that particular factor affect the cost effectiveness of a single upgrade, but there are other factors in the same models, and nobody better than the expert at E3 would know that in terms of economies of scale. How much faster do the costs of the equipment go down when you're able to reach the economies of scale that participation in tariffed on-bill programs can produce? And what other types of incentives or programs that may be coming in through other types of policies actually adjust the amount of capital that the utility is accounting for? Say there's a $10,000 upgrade that's needed at the building, the utility's capital may only be a fraction, maybe half of that, with the other half being paid for through other policies or other mechanisms. This is exactly the type of due diligence that this white paper concludes in its recommendation is needed next. And I'm thrilled by the enthusiastic participation in the chat box that shows how many knowledgeable people in California are ready to get started. Thank you, Panama, for giving us the opportunity.
Yeah, this is Jean.
Wonderful.
Also, just quickly, you know, when you're talking about raising capital, there are various sources. You know, there's equity, there's debt. The bond market these days is, you know, down around 1%. So I think, again, these details have to be worked out, but depending on the composition of where the capital comes from and what the risk protection mechanisms are, the cost could be anywhere in that 1 to 8% range. But, you know, the challenge is to figure out how to structure it in a way that it's as low as possible.
Great. I'm going to pull this to an end. It was probably one of our more robust chat discussions of any of our webinars. So what we'll do is we will work with the presenters to answer these. We have all of your emails from your registration, and we will send out some answers to all of the questions. And then I encourage you to directly contact Holmes and Bruce for any additional questions and to access the white paper, because hopefully the white paper answers many of your questions as well. And we've linked that a number of times in the chat. I want to thank the presenters, but I particularly want to thank all the attendees today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on a future BDC Presents webinar series. Keep up the great work out there, everybody. Bye-bye.